Okay, Brendan says we're good to go. So good afternoon, counselors. Good afternoon. I think we're joined by Commissioner Colton Harris, as well as TJ in the Situation Room. From a council standpoint at the moment, we are joined by Councilor Fenton, Councilor Whitfield, Councilor Davila, Councilor Gomez, Councilor Allen, and then it looks like we have Paul Tuthill on the phone, as well as, on the call, as well as Peter Goonan. So thank you so much for joining us. We will get started with the administration's update. To my colleagues, before we get started, if you haven't checked your email, I did send out an email this morning highlighting the upcoming dates or upcoming meetings. We will have a meeting with TJ Plant on Tuesday. So if you want to, so what we're going to do, and we're also going to have a meeting with Tim Sheehan at 12:05. Or if we're not finished with our regular meeting, then we'll push him back a little later, but he's committed to meeting with us this afternoon as well. And so hopefully we will have him for an hour after this update. For those that want to stay on, if you don't want to stay on, by all means, you can certainly exit. So Commissioner Harris, Colton Harris, we'll get started with you. I think I need to tend to Councilor Ramos, who is having some difficulty. So go for it, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, councilors, for this opportunity to update you and answer any questions that you have. I understand that there are some questions about testing and perhaps a lack of transparency. So I will be happy to update you with that. Let me start with the positive cases in Springfield, in Hampton County, with 3,698. Springfield has 1,339. That differs from the state number, but I am staying with the numbers that I take off for the city of Springfield based on what I have in our database. I'm sure at some point we will reconcile that, but our number as of yesterday is 1,339. And when I reported on April 6th, there were 171 unique locations in the city of Springfield. Those unique locations have now, as of April 29th, are 784, which means there are 784 places in the city where there is a COVID positive resident living. The discrepancy in the data has to do with nursing homes, congregate living, those types of settings where there's more than one positive. The zip codes remain 01103, 4, 5, 7, and 8 that has the highest number of cases based on a number of factors that I'm happy to discuss if you'd like. People have asked me about giving out the maps. I have happy to send you a copy. I'm not doing that for the most part electronically, but if you'd like a copy of the map without streets, happy to do that. Hampton County is recording 358 deaths. I know I got an email this morning from Councilor Davila asking if we could put the deaths on the city's website. And what I've said is that right now we are scrubbing the data around the deaths in the city. Every death that happens in the city, wherever at Bay State that may not be a resident of the city of Springfield, are also recorded. My staff for this afternoon or tomorrow will have for me Springfield only data. And also want to remind you, when the epidemic or pandemic first started, the death data was recorded as respiratory disease, then it was recorded as pneumonia. Only recently have they been putting COVID-19 on the death certificate so that we can pick that up. So that even when I have those numbers, they may not be accurate based on the deaths that happened prior to us being able to classify the deaths as COVID-19. The death classification does not come from my department. It comes from the hospital and or a physician and is given to us for processing. The average age of deaths in the Commonwealth is 54 years old, contrary to it is the older population that is dying at an increased rate, but the average death rate or age is 54. 11.8 are Hispanic, 7.7 African American, and 22.2 white. And one of the most disturbing parts of this data is that there's 54.1 that's unknown or missing. So more than half of the deaths that occurred based on COVID-19 are not recorded because the race ethnicity was missing. The hospitals in the Western region, as you know, are reporting a decline in hospitalizations, while the Eastern part is saying that their hospitalizations have remained at a steady pace, so they're not seeing the same decline. Testing, and I'm happy to answer those questions. We ramped up testing, and I've been working for a week with Mercy and Bay State to get our testing ramped up. So Bay State will be doing our homeless individuals tomorrow, and that's a definite date. They will do them tomorrow. They're doing Carew Street and High Street currently. I should say they will do all of our homeless individuals, but for Carew and High, they are doing symptomatic individuals with a doctor's note. We have asked them to staff up Brightwood and Mason Square. That will happen next week. I just got that email yesterday. And so Mason Square and Brightwood will be stepped up for testing. Again, they will be done with a doctor's note and for the most part, symptomatic individuals. Mercy Medical Center, you will see that article from them tomorrow. I believe they are going to do Taylor Street tomorrow. We're talking about the rescue mission. We're talking about Ron Willoughby's place. So they will do that tomorrow. And then next week, they will do the 10 Mill Street site. I will stop there and answer your questions.
Before we move on to questions, we're also joined by Councilor Letterman, who I neglected to mention, as well as Councilor Ramos, and I think I saw Councilor Edwards joining the call as well. Are there any other updates, TJ or from the solicitor?
I'll hold off until Tuesday unless there's questions on the memo and information I sent last night.
I think that makes sense. Solicitor
walked in as well, so he's here as well.
I see. We're also joined by Tim Sheehan, Director of Economic Development. Solicitor, did you have anything?
No, as you know, we've been working to have a hearing coming up on 2 special permits, I believe, that'll be set for May 18th. Well, we'll have the first tier of the hearing, and it'll be continued to June 1st to actually close the hearing, deliberate, and vote. And that'll be a hearing process. And so I think a lot of your colleagues across the state have started having remote meetings. Very, very few have been able to do the public hearings. So we're dipping our toe into that. And my hope is that we'll not only get through it, but be able to return to something more normal after. But I think that, you know, and I thank you for working so close with me on this issue and your cooperation to come up with something that's workable, simple, and protects everyone's rights.
So thank you, Solicitor. And that 2-tier process, that may not be necessary, correct, Solicitor? If there is no one looking present to speak against the petition, that would mean we could close the hearing right there. Is that accurate?
No,
No.
It just means that the second, it'll be a 2-part hearing, but the second part will be very short if there's nothing in opposition.
Okay.
And it should really simplify things.
Got it. Thank you, Solicitor. Okay, so we will not go in order since most of our questions will be directed towards the commissioner. And so if people have questions for the commissioner, I would ask you to keep them solely to the commissioner. Ask one question and or make a comment. And you can do that at this time by raising your hand. And so I will look at my screen, see whose hand's raised, and call on you accordingly. Sorry, give me a moment. There we go. Councilor Whitfield, we will start with you.
Thank you, President Hurst. Thank you, everybody, for being here and all the hard work you continue to do. Commissioner, I've been seeing a lot of data that's showing like African Americans, Black people have different symptoms than the fever, the coughing, the respiratory symptoms, more like pain in their muscles, maybe some blood clotting and things like that. And even my cousin has corona and was turned away because he didn't meet the fever requirements. And so I don't know if there's any discussion around different symptoms and like turning people away or not, because their symptoms don't meet the fever requirement. I'm not sure if you heard anything about that.
Yeah, muscle aches have always, fever, cough, muscle aches have always been a part of the CDC's concern. They have added some new symptoms. The new symptoms were loss of taste, loss of smell, but I did not see in the data where it talked about specific symptoms based on race and ethnicity. So I certainly will check into that for you, Counselor, but that is not something that I'm aware of at this point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor Whitfield. I see Counselor Ramos, followed by Counselor Letterman with a hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
The question is for the Commissioner. Commissioners, my question is relative to the Governor's extension of the non-essential businesses and his, I guess, timeline for a reopening of, quote unquote, reopening of businesses in Massachusetts. And so I guess my question to you, Commissioner, is what, as a health expert, what would you like to see between now and then in order to feel comfortable with opening non-essential businesses and reopening municipal buildings, et cetera?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and it's something that we are all working on as far as the municipal buildings and City Hall. There is a template that we have in terms of what processes and procedures we will consider putting in place to reopen municipal buildings, and so that is ongoing. As far as essential businesses are concerned, there will be a discussion, but we will essentially look to the state, I think, to give us guidance, but I can certainly defer that to Mayor Sarno to answer. But as far as municipal buildings are concerned, we are starting that process and that consideration at this point.
If I can just ask a follow-up, is there anything in particular that any data or anything that you think needs to happen between now and May 18th in order to move to that next step?
So my concern always has been the testing of asymptomatic individuals to understand how pervasive the virus is in the city of Springfield. Right now, we're only testing symptomatic individuals. So for me, from a data perspective, to understand the real penetration of the virus in any municipality, I think we have to look at those people who are not displaying symptoms, but have the ability to pass on the virus. You know that at the federal level, there is still concern about having enough test kits to be able to test all individuals. So that's at the federal level, and I'm sure it's at the state level as well. But my comfort level, and I think most public health individuals' comfort level, have to do with the fact that we'd like to see asymptomatic people be able to be tested. We'd like to be able to make sure we're doing appropriate contact tracing. Otherwise, we're going to continue to reinfect each other unless we put those mitigation strategies in place.
Thank you, Counselor Ramos. Counselor Gomez, I don't know if I mentioned you, sir, but we are also joined by Counselor Gomez, Counselor Letterman, followed by Counselor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, for those that test positive and are staying at the rescue mission site with regard to the homeless asymptomatic testing, will they be able to be quarantined at the triage tents that the city established? And also, do we have any outreach to individuals who may be homeless but not staying at Friends of the Homeless or the rescue mission?
Thank you, Counselor. That's an excellent question. And the answer is yes, we will allow any individual who is unsheltered to stay at the facility down on Worthington Street that the city has built. So yes, anyone in the city can, if they are under a person under investigation, or if they're COVID positive, those individuals, wherever they are, can stay there. The second part to your question, the outreach. Yes, when I say the outreach, we've asked those organizations and agencies that deal with unsheltered individuals in our city to make sure they're doing that outreach to, number one, make sure that they're secure as far as their food security is concerned, make sure that they know that we're available for them. So they have been doing outreach, and we particularly wanted that outreach to be done around the testing that we're getting ready to do. This isn't just for individuals who are from the rescue mission or from Friends of the Homeless. It's for anybody in our city who is unsheltered, who is having symptoms and wants to be tested.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Councilor Letterman. Councilor Allen.
Thanks, Mr. President. Helen, two questions tied together relating to the state stuff. The first one was, we talked about a week ago where there were, I think, 14 community health centers and none had been picked in none were in Western Mass. So an update on that, and kind of related to that is, where's the line between the guidance we get from the state and the independence we have to make our own decisions, like on reopening or on testing or whatever the different issues are? Is it really a Springfield decision, or is there guidance from the state? So those are my two wrapped together questions.
So the Western Mass testing, as you know, the state came back and said they were standing up Caring Health Center. And then we read in the newspaper that Caring Health Center was not going to be one of their testing sites. That is really what helped us to really understand we needed to do some real targeted outreach to those individuals in our city who provide health care, who have health centers throughout the city. And that's really the strategy that we used independently. And so that's why you're seeing Bay State and Mercy come online.
Okay.
In terms of the state, I have not been giving any information that they have chosen a health center in the Western region. However, they did say in one of their communications that they will be announcing more health centers soon. So perhaps that will answer your question. The reality was we couldn't wait for them. We needed to move and do what was necessary in order to test the individuals who were homeless or unsheltered in our city and those who had symptoms. So that's what we've done. In terms of following the state, the mayor has, for the most part, taken the approach that we are following Governor Baker's lead, and you would simply have to ask he or Tom Ash what they will follow as far as that next step is concerned, because I'm not sure at this point.
Okay, thank you. Good answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. And Tom apologizes that he couldn't be here. There's a for the graduating police academy that is taking place at the same time as our meeting. So he apologizes, and he will see you next week for an update. Councilor Davila.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Commissioner Carlton. Thank you for looking into that information for the death toll in Springfield. It's a painful figure to look at, but an important one. And thank you for looking into that matter. I just wanted to make a quick comment regarding the testing sites. Today, I drove by the Cary Health Center on downtown on Main Street, and I have to say that I was pretty impressed with their setup. They have a very good setup for people that are going there to do healthcare needs. And I could see them based upon their strategic location downtown, and also in my own district here on Sumner Avenue, we have a clinic here from Cary Health Center. I could see them being of great value in the fight for COVID-19. I realize they're not currently on the list of people doing testing, but perhaps it's something that we can work to bring them on board, to the state, or we can do some outreach to them from the city standpoint, because I think they will be great partners.
Thank you. Caring Health Center is testing only their patients at this point. They're not seeing the community broadly, but I agree with you. They're doing an excellent job in reaching out to their patients and making sure that they're tested. So thank you. I'm sure Tanya Barber would appreciate the fact that you said that they're doing a good job. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Are there any other questions for the commissioner before we move on? Say again, are there any other questions for the commissioner?
Mr. President.
Yes. Ooh, I'm not sure who that was. I don't see.
It was Councilor Letterman.
Councilor Letterman, yes.
I had a question too.
Okay.
I'll defer to Councilor Gomez because he hasn't talked yet.
My question is, being our health professional, Commissioner Colton, what powers do you have, if any, that supersedes decision making for the better good of the public health? So significant to, if I know some of my colleagues spoke to, opening up and, independent power. You yourself as our public health institute professional, are there things that you can in place in the name of public health? Do you have that power that supersedes, let's say, the mayor's power, or for some reason? It's just a quick question. And then my follow-up question was, I've heard that some cities, I know that we're a lot bigger town and city, but we have seen that some of our neighbors have mandated folks to go out there with masks or coverings on their face. Why is it that we've only put an advisory and mandated? Because, in the urban setting that we live in, West Springfield, Chicopee, Holyoke, we're basically boroughs of a great bigger structure. And regionally, are there any of those conversations happening that regionally we are, working with other cities to kind of blanket the same approaches? Because obviously we jump to different cities, just like with buying food, because a lot of where some of us live as councilors, because I've heard in our last calls, we've been able. So basically, it's what's the difference between the advisories that we make and then the smaller towns around us mandating masks, and then secondly, do you have powers in your public health setting? Is somebody cutting something? I'm just looking.
Can you mute your phone? Can you mute your computer if you're not speaking, please?
I just wanted to ask that question, Commissioner Colton. Thank you. Those two questions: one about the masks, and then other cities blanket testing, like testing all the residents, like Somerville, and then versus now the fact of what kind of powers do you have on a public health perspective as being our public health leader? Do you have powers that supersede the mayor's power if you needed to make that decision on the benefit of our people or our city?
So I heard three questions. Let me make sure of what they are. Powers of the Board of Health, the face covering advisory, and testing all residents. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the powers of the Board of Health are found under Mass General Laws, Chapter 111. They are sweeping and they are broad. They mostly relate to the ability to manage the environment. And so when you talk about, so we have the power to shut down entities that we license. And we license food entities, we license tobacco entities. We can make decisions based on the good of the broad public, yes, as far as the public health is concerned. So that's the power. And it's broad and sweeping, there's no doubt. We can do cease and desist. We can do many things under the power of the Board of Health using Chapter 111. That power is in conjunction with the authority of the municipal official who is the CEO of the city. So do I have power does the Board of Health have powers to supersede the mayor's power? They are commingled in conjunction with the power. So it's, I hope that answers your question. It's broad, but it's separate. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, the powers Because obviously, the reason why I ask is just for, you know, different places, different types of businesses that I think have, you know, in my opinion, have become problematic with consistent COVID-19, tests, that they've become positive. And, you know, like 90 Meat Outlet or Arnold's, they came out positive in one test, and they shut down. And maybe that's something that they did on their own. But I was just wondering what kind of powers essentially the Board of Health could do if need be. And not that, you know, just so the reason why I asked about the mayor is just because I don't want the question to be confused with, I'm trying to get you to do something without the mayors. It's just, how does that, you know, work in correlation? And then just with the other two questions, I'll let you answer.
So the 90 Meat Outlet, we shut down. So we have the powers to shut down. When we have the powers, when I say shut down, when we found out that there was a positive person in there, we did go in and we did ask them to close down. So we do have those powers. The face covering advisory, yes, we did an advisory versus a mandatory, because it's very difficult to enforce mandating face coverings in the city of Springfield. I mean, can you imagine our police officers or health officials going up to an individual and saying, you don't have on your face? I get that we could do it, but we are just strongly recommending and asking each one of you, wherever you are, please ask your constituents to wear face covering. So we've done it as an advisory, just to try to make sure that we're being considerate of those essential businesses who are open, and to make sure that we're asking our residents to cooperate with us. Can we make it mandatory? Yes. Is it enforceable? I don't know. I think the other thing around going back and individuals on city lines, I work closely with Holyoke, particularly with the health center in Holyoke. And so we are talking to each other about residents in Holyoke and Springfield, particularly. So those are the outlying places. We also are working with Chicopee as far as there, because you know that we have our animal control individuals go into Holyoke and Chicopee. So we have a good relationship where we're working with them. And testing all residents is not possible. We do not have the test kits. That's why individuals who are just symptomatic are being tested at this point.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. Councilor Davila, you have another question for the commissioner?
I do. Thank you. Just kind of a follow-up with Councilor Gomez, what you're saying. Commissioner, do we have, with regards to places such as meat outlet and other stores that sell poultry, before I go on, I recognize we have enough food in the city supply, enough food supply for a while. But is there any way that, in terms of monitoring the employees for signs and symptoms of COVID-19, how are we finding that out? Are they required to report to the city so often, or do we do site inspections and ask if any of the employees are sick, so that we don't end up in situations we have multiple food supply locations shut down?
We don't have the ability, Councilor, to go into stores and monitor employees. That's not something that we can do. The only thing we can do is the advisory that we've given that says if you're sick, stay home. So we don't have the staff to go into particular stores, if that's your question. It is very difficult to see individuals in stores where they're doing food service and you observe that they're not feeling well, but I'm not sure how you enforce that.
Trying to play video games.
It's up to the employer.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I just background noise, I couldn't hear the end.
It's up to the employer.
Oh, so it's self-reporting right now. Okay.
It's up to the employer and the individual. Attorney Pakula wanted to answer one of my questions.
No, I just wanted to supplement. She talked about the enforceability. You know, the City of Springfield Police Department does have the authority, the power to arrest, for violation of any regulation that we impose. That being said, there's something to be said for government's best that governs least. And I don't think we want to run around arresting people because they don't have a mask on. And I hope we don't do that. And the point is, we have found that for the most part, people have been compliant with advisories, and the point is to have it be a normal behavior. And I think it's becoming a normal behavior. And then it becomes part of the social contract that we all have with each other. And that's really the best way to run a government if we can. If we get to the point where we see crowds gathering, and without masks, we have approached them, we have asked them to disperse, and for the most part, it's been compliant. And so this has not been a major problem. If there are certain businesses that we have found open, we have gone back and said to them, hey, you can't be open, and they have shut down. There have been some that have been repeated. And so in those, we've sent out a cease and desist, and that has been enough. We do have the capability to go to court, and if we have to get an injunction to stop them. As of today, we haven't had to do that, but we're prepared to do that. And the courts and us have discussed that issue so that we have a process to do that if it's needed. But as the commissioner has said, this is an advisory, and we hope people will work with an advisory, and that we don't need to step it up to the point where we need to impose orders upon people to get them to do things that should be common sense.
But if I may, thank you, Solicitor, for that. If I may, a quick follow-up, Mr. President. Commissioner, so in regards to food establishments that sell poultry, chicken, meat, things of that nature, uncooked, that is, if an employee is found out to be COVID-19 positive, is that food supply in which the employee was working on considered contaminated? Does the virus has any impact on that?
If an individual working in a grocery store or an essential business is found to be COVID positive, we ask them to close the facility, period. We ask them to do a cleaning of that facility, and they should not be taking in any food that is supply that is coming from an entity that has reported a COVID-19 case. And we know that there are several large food establishments who are reporting COVID-19 positives. Stores should not be taking that product in on their shelves. But again, if an employee tests positive, it is our job to go out and ask them to voluntarily close down. And as the solicitor said, if they don't, then we have the power to order them to do it with the cease and desist.
Thank you,
thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Councilor Letterman, I apologize for skipping over you. The floor is yours.
Commissioner, just looping back to our conversation with the progress on homeless testing of individuals without shelter. Do we have an idea now that Bay State will be starting Friday and Mercy starting over the weekend, how fast they will ramp up and how many individuals they will be able to test?
Sure. Bay State is going to test as many as they can on Friday. If they do not complete the entire population, they will be back on Monday. So we anticipate that that could be potentially a 2-day process. The rescue mission on Taylor Street, there are about 30 individuals there. We should be able to test those individuals, weather permitting. We will do them tomorrow or Saturday morning, depending on the weather. So we will test those, and then we will move to the Mill Street property to test those individuals who are housed there. So that is what has been laid out as the process currently. So hopefully, Councilor, we can get everyone within that span of time. The hospitals are being extremely cooperative, as you know, but they're going to start their regular admission process on May 11th. And so we have a couple of week window to get as many tests done as possible. And as I said, they're going to stand up Brightwood and Square as 2 new sites.
And I know that Boston and Worcester, you know, they released some of these results. Do we know whether we will release the results? And if we do, I just think that I think we need to know the rates of the asymptomatic positives. But I also think it's important to avoid inadvertent stigmatization of the homeless population, and for people to understand that even if there are high rates of asymptomatic positives, that's more reflective of the fact that we know there's high rates of asymptomatic positives in the entire community.
So let me say we have tested 25 individuals who are unsheltered or homeless, and none of them came back COVID-19 positive. So that we know currently. When we test the broader population, Counselor, I'm looking at your picture, you're not there. But anyway, when we test the broader population, what I will simply say, hey, you, what I will simply say is 30%, 20%, 10%. So I won't give a specific, obviously, any details, but I'm certainly happy to give a percentage.
Okay, yeah, and I just think as long as we provide the context around that as well, that's proper.
We will do.
Thank you, Councilor Letterman. Councilor Gomez, I saw your hand raised. We have roughly 8 minutes left in this update before we.
Thank you, Mr. President. It was more into leading into my colleague, Councilor Letterman's questions. You said, Commissioner Colton, that it's probably going to be a 2-step process, and I know this is a lot to ask, but in between the meantime of, let's say, testing group A to testing group B, what's the protocol of making sure those people are separated because how contagious COVID-19 is? Let's say everybody tests negative in group A, and then in group B, you mix these folks back together, and then all of a sudden we wasted a bunch of tests because maybe group B gets tested and 1 or 2 people, you know, and then all of a sudden in the process of them testing positive, they transfer the virus to group A. Is there a system and protocol to keep these folks separated while they're being tested? Commissioner Colton Harris?
Yes, but thank you. That's an excellent question, Councilor Gomez. When an individual is tested, Bay State's tests are going to take 2 days to do. And so once we test that first cohort, they will be called persons under investigation. They will go into that area of the tent that we have built for persons under the investigation. They will stay there until the test results come back. Once the test results come back, if they are COVID positive, those individuals will go to the COVID positive area, and the others who come back negative will be able to be released into general population. Does that answer your question?
It suffices. I just wanted to ask if there was a protocol system. I know we have 2 tents, and I wanted you to just descriptively, you know, because you said that it could be one day they're going to do some testing, and then if they can't get to it, they're going to come back again 3 days later, because you said on Friday. So that gives 3 days, which essentially, yes, these folks are under investigation. Hopefully, Bay State comes back to us by Monday and can release some of these folks that aren't positive or not. But I appreciate the answer. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Gomez. Councilors, it is now 12:15. We started 5 minutes late. And so what I'd like to do is if there are any questions that cannot wait until next Tuesday for TJ, then if we could just entertain those now. And I'm more so just thinking about questions around data that we could possibly get TJ to get to us in advance of Tuesday. So if there are any questions and or comments or suggestions, if we could be very brief, if you have them, then we can entertain those at this time. If there are none, then we can
Mr.
move
President,
to,
Mr.
Tim. Yes, Councilor Gomez.
The only data that I think that was would be important. I know that the Commissioner Colton Harris and TJ had spoke that there was CARES money that came not directly to the city, but they were doing some kind of investigation on where that CARES money went to, if it was nonprofits or other, and if those are if they have found out who are the organizations in Western Massachusetts that got this CARES money, and how are we working collaboratively with them for Tuesday, that'd be awesome, if they don't have them now.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. Even if you have them now, if we could save the answers until Tuesday, it would be greatly appreciated. Are there any other requests directly for TJ so that we can get that information in advance of Tuesday?
Mr. President, if I just quickly.
Councilor Davila.
Thank you.
If you guys could raise your hands in the queue, it would be greatly appreciated. Go ahead, Councilor Davila.
Thank you. TJ, thank you for the memo you sent out yesterday. It was very informative. But just maybe for Tuesday, if you could find out, I was looking over on page one, I don't know if it's 3 or 2, where it says emergency deficit spending by department. That table there, I noticed a big difference between the fire and the police in emergency spending. And it seems to me that most of the stuff was for the same request, sort of. Just kind of, if I could get more information on that on Tuesday.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Councilor Gomez, did you have another request for TJ?
Yeah. Another question was if he could get us any information on if there's any city employees that are receiving overtime pay for some reason. Can you tell me why they're getting overtime pay, and to be a little descriptive on what departments are experiencing those influx that folks need to stay after, or if we have a shortage of staff, that's also recommended as well if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. Are there any other requests for TJ in advance of Tuesday? Again, TJ will be at our disposal for at least an hour. Hopefully we'll get
Mr.
it
President,
done.
I apologize. Another recommendation is anybody that we have contracted or procured when we're releasing money specific to the KN95 masks that we've all been asking that have been en route, and anything we've spent money relative to COVID, also expenditures, on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll hear Orlando, and then what I'm going to ask the rest of the councilors to do is if there's additional information that you want to email TJ in advance so that we all can receive that information and prepare appropriately for Tuesday. Thank you. Orlando, you have the last word before we get to Tim.
Mr. President, during our first virtual Zoom meeting, I asked about procurement and city contracts that have not been paid out due to COVID. I'm going to be asking some follow-up questions regarding that issue on Tuesday. So just wanted to give TJ the heads up that I'll be looking for some data and information and numbers related to contracts that are not being paid out.
Okay. Thank you, councilors. Thank you, Commissioner Colton Harris. As always, did you have a quick question or comment?
I actually want to thank you. You're one of the individuals who are going out there on the radio and talking very specifically to the community. So thank you for your leadership, Council President. It's been very important to the community. Folks have given me feedback that they've heard you. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Colton Harris, and thank you, Councilor Whitfield, for joining me the other day as well. I certainly appreciate it, and anything we can do to help, Commissioner, we will try to do so. Thank you again, Commissioner. At this time, we will move to Tim Sheehan, Director of Economic Development, and it seems to me, Tim, that you can give us a brief report out on the recent round 2 of the CDBG grant funds, and then we will open it up for questions in a similar fashion that we just did. So, Tim, it is on you.
Sure. Thank you. the applications in total between the 2 rounds, we received over 200 applications, 202 to be precise. 30 restaurants in the first round.
Because you don't have cream cheese.
You don't have to know about that.
Yeah, I said you don't even know about the cream cheese.
If we can mute the cream cheese, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Oh, sorry.
30 restaurants were funded in the first round, representing 34% of the applicants. 76 awards were done in the small business round, representing 65% of all the applicants. Of the 116 small businesses, 27 applicants either were closed or had no payroll or direct employees. So of the 89 eligible businesses, 85 were funded to some degree. In looking at the awards, if the applicants scored between 90 and 100, they were given a grant of $15,000. If they scored between 80 and 90%, they were given a grant for $10,000. 70 to 80%, they were given a grant for $7,500. 50 to 70%, they were given a grant for $2,500. Seemingly there's been some questions that have come your way with regards to the franchise restaurant. I sent out a response to that question in my communication to the council yesterday. I think it's important to note that Subway and Sonic actually have current total employees of 30, of which 25 of those employees are Springfield residents. Sonic specifically employing 20 Springfield residents currently. And I'm happy, and in the interest of everyone's time, I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Tim. We'll start off with Councilor Whitfield, followed by Councilor Gomez.
Thank you very much. My question is, did any of the requirements in Prime to Pump 1 grant application change and Prime to Pump grant application 2?
There were different questions that were presented to the restaurant applicants than the small business applicants, because it was seemingly the issue relative to the restaurants was specific to employees and maintaining the employees, and that was the only thing that ultimately they could be reimbursed for. In the second round, because it was small business, it basically allowed them to be reimbursed, use the grant for inventory, rent, and other things like that.
Sorry, Councilor President, just to follow up on the grant application, is there any stipulation for businesses going through any type of legal ramifications to disqualify them for the grant?
Legal ramifications with
any type of lawsuits, anything criminal, pending, under investigation, anything like that, would that disqualify them from getting an award?
There was an issue with regards to if the business had been considered a nuisance business, and that would be in so much as there had been a number of calls related to calls to the police relative to the business. If there had been significant violations from health code related to the business, things like that, but nothing directly to a business owner having a legal issue.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield.
I'll follow up after.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. Councilor Gomez, I believe you had your hand raised.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Sheehan, I had emailed you a specific question, and I know you had answered me with an educational answer, educating us on, what the HUD requirements and the CDBG requirements, which I know during the first round, you and I spoke about 2 times, and I was fully aware of that. But I specifically was just wondering if it was possible, because I was working in close with the state's Latino and Black Caucus Chair, Carlos Gonzalez, and because I was the chairman of economic development, I had asked if you could just provide me, not necessarily stating or stipulating that it was a requirement, but what businesses were Latino, what businesses were Black, Asian, or other, just in retrospect to get some demographics, just to show that, everybody got some kind of money regardless. So, and I still haven't kind of received that information. I was just wondering if that information is a problem to attain. I just want to know if it can't happen or not.
The best I could possibly do in response to that question is to infer based on the business and the aims relative to the business owners. I wouldn't necessarily want to put that out as a formalized document because I don't think that that's the best way to actually provide that information without full certainty that the business is owned by someone who is Latino. It's kind of going based on a surname and the type of business that it is, which I don't think is actually the best way to provide that information. But if that's something that you're looking for, we can try to figure that out for you.
I would just really appreciate it. I think that any other city is, any other city has been giving out this kind of information versus, statistics when it comes to minority businesses, and also looking into the fact of, maybe versus, because we're just trying to look at more numbers, not necessarily only to the city, because obviously our city has been proactive in creating this fund to help our businesses, but more or less of, using this with numbers of SBA and minority businesses being shut out, and the types of businesses retrieving or getting these funds. And the reason why is because my email is being flooded, and I understand there were stipulations of the scoring, and I was an understanding of part of the application that it was a narrative standpoint, that there was a scoring on the narrative that you write on this application that was scored. And sometimes in people's native tongue, it's hard for different narratives to be thought out if they don't have the proper linguistic skills. And I don't know, I'm just trying to be proactive with my constituents in my business community, and also with the chair of Latino Caucus, because we were going through the businesses that were selected, and we were just having a hard time figuring out, because not all businesses that are Latino or Black have kind of like let's say Mi Cultura, right? That's a Spanish name, and of course we would assume that it's a Latino business, but Berkshire Auto is owned by a Latino person, but it necessarily Berkshire Auto is just a street, right? And it's just, I'm trying to just figure out without so I can be consistent with reporting back to different organizations and social organizations on those statistics. And that's the only reason why I asked. Thank you.
You do have something to say.
Counselor, did you want to respond to that, Tim?
I would actually, just in terms of, I know many of you are hearing from businesses that are closed and they have laid off their employees. And please understand, from our perspective, that does not make them a bad business or something that, they shouldn't be eligible for some level of funding. But on this particular program, the way we're threading the national objective is that they have to evidence that they are maintaining payroll for a low and moderate income employee. Obviously, if the business is closed and the employees have been laid off, or the employees ultimately are independent contractors to the business can't provide us evidence that ultimately they have that employee. And in terms of working with businesses to try to facilitate what we're looking for with regards to the narrative questions. We fielded many phone calls working with the businesses to explain to them exactly what type of information needed to be in those narrative questions. If the business provided us, you know, an inkling, at the very least, they were given points with regards to their response.
Tim, can you just follow up with respect to the narrative in terms of the percentage? How many points out of 100 or out of 10 was the narrative worth? And then we'll have Councilor Davila followed by Councilor Whitfield. And if you sent it, I apologize.
That is okay, no problem at all. The narrative was reviewed looking at the following. Explain how the grant will be spent aligned with the priorities. How does the business meet the goals of the priority considerations, and business plan for operating for the next 90 days. Each of those questions was worth 10 points.
That was 30 points out of 100. Is that correct?
Yes. Would it be helpful for the council members if I went through how it was all reviewed?
Sure.
So there were three components to the application. It was funding priorities, priority considerations, and narrative questions. Under the funding priorities, these were the following focus that each scorer was looking at. Is the project low, moderate income job creation or retention? Does the project stimulate business activity during this time? Is the job creation retention within posted income limits? Evidence funds to operate for the next 90 days. Of those funding priorities, those 4 questions were worth 5 points. The priority considerations, 1 was the business in a CDBG eligible area. 2, 2019 operating revenue under $500,000, indicating that we wanted to focus and give weight to smaller businesses. 3, open/operating with more than 5 full-time employees, allowing for 0.5 for a part-time employee. 4, employing Springfield residents. 5, in operation more than 3 years. Each of those priority considerations was given 10 points.
Thank you, Councilor Davila, followed by Councilor Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Tim. I got 2 quick questions, Tim. First, regarding the food truck industry in Springfield. I know that's a particular niche we've been trying to grow for a while now. And of those people, those 200 applications that you mentioned, if you were able to tell us, was there any food truck entity that applied? If not, is there anything that could be tailored specifically for that food truck industry? I realize, you know, with this current situation, it's difficult for everybody, particularly them, most likely. And also, my second question is there anything past the current situation we're going on? Part of the problem is that we have this uncertainty when this is going to end. And so if we go through August, so let's say the crisis ends in August, but then we have to deal with the economic crisis thereafter. Is there any kind of part 2 trying to pump grants coming down from either the federal government or the state level?
With the food truck, I sitting here right now thinking about 202 applications. I'm not 100% certain, but I think I do recall that there was one. I can find out the status of that, and as the council president directed, I can certainly email that to all of you. With regards to the issue of the economic crisis, I think it's fair to say that we're just starting to address the economic crisis that's a result of this virus. It's going to be ongoing and it's going to be prolonged. Right now, we are in the process of finalizing the action plan with regards to the CDBG CD funding that came with the CARES Act. There's a significant component of that funding that's being allocated for small business assistance. And there is also a significant component that's being aligned with public services, which ultimately can help defer some of the expenses that might not be covered by FEMA that the city has already deployed resources to. As I said, we have a pretty big a funding component that really is looking at providing the economic assistance to re-engage businesses into opening up and things like that. And I think that's one of the important things with regards to the businesses that are closed is that they're going to need help ultimately coming back into the local economy. Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that we'll have a program to help in that regard as well. The other issue I think that is important that we have now addressed the restaurants because they were the first ones impacted. We have gone to the small businesses, but as all of you know, the nonprofit sector in Springfield is a huge contributor to our economy, and I think there needs to be some focus on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. I see Councilor Whitfield's hand raised, followed by Councilor Gomez.
Thank you. Tim, I had asked if the applications for Prime to Pump round 1 and 2 could be sent to the council because it was my understanding that folks that applied for Prime to Pump round 1 had to resubmit an application for round 2. Is that correct?
No, they didn't have to submit an application.
I mean, if they wanted to, say they didn't get the whole 15,000 and then they wanted to get the difference, they would have to put in another application. And if they were denied the the grant in round 1 and wanted to reapply for Prime to Pump round 2, they would have to put in an additional application. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and the reason that I wanted to look at the application, because I'm interested in reading the narratives. And I don't know if you put the ratings right on the narratives or if you use a separate spreadsheet, but I'm just interested to see what people wrote as far as their narratives go.
So I'm working with the law department in response to your request. The solicitor has basically said to me that there's parts of that application that are have information with regards to the businesses as their tax exempt or their tax ID number and things like that need to be redacted. So as soon as we can get through taking care of the redactions that the law department thinks are necessary, we will definitely get the hard copy to the council.
Well, let me ask you this, solicitor, because when we did the marijuana applications, the applications were put on fobs and they were given to all the counselors. Wasn't that same type of, I'm talking to solicitor Tim, not you. Wasn't that information on the marijuana application? So I'm kind of confused as to what the concerns are.
Well, you were on the committee, so you had access.
Yeah, but the counselors got the applications on a USB.
Not the confidential portions.
Okay, so you just got to take off like tax ID number, things like that?
Yeah.
And then we could get access to the applications?
Yes.
Just to interject before I turn it over to Councilor Gomez, solicitor, what is an estimated time frame on getting those applications, do you think?
10 days.
Okay. Councilor Gomez.
Man. Oh yeah. So one, I think that Mr. Sheehan does make a great point specific to the nonprofits. I know that was one of the things stipulated on the SBA side, and it was part of the CARES Act money that was coming in. But in respect to, is there any conversation around sole proprietors? Because I know that my colleague, Mr. Davila, had stated food trucks, usually food trucks are sole proprietors in some sort of way. A lot of small and micro businesses, particularly the micro businesses that are small proprietors, You know, that's part of the, I know that we want to help out businesses that have employees, and I understand the, you know, the process of what you guys are trying to, what you guys created. But essentially, is there any conversation specific to maybe smaller grant funds, or if maybe in the near future, if there is other pots of money that come in that only sole proprietors can have access to, specific to small micro businesses that necessarily can't go out and receive any of that kind of or apply to the city, because I know that some of those type of businesses have come across our desk. You know, not saying that they've been accepted or not, but when it comes to the loan review and things of that nature.
There was no prohibition on either round for a sole proprietor, but ultimately, that if they were receiving a paycheck from the business, their pay had to ultimately be within the low moderate income range that HUD has established.
So essentially, if a sole proprietor, they would have to show that they were paying themselves as an employee, other than, you know, because obviously the money in the application is pertinent to the fact that it's to the PPP, right? So that they have some kind of way that they're retaining an employee at their business. Because from what I understand, some sole proprietors felt that they were kind of X'd out. Not saying that you guys deliberately did that. I'm not saying that. I just wanted to be clear. But I'm just saying a more of an awareness, because some of the way the application is been cut is to more of the tune of the fact that, you know, you guys have to have employees. Obviously, we in the restaurants, you know, with the first round, and then going into the second round, you know. So was there any sole proprietors? Maybe I could wait for that answer too, because I know you would have to do some digging. Was there any sole proprietors that applied? And if they did, you know, did any of them get it? And that's all.
I'll definitely look into that for you. But I know there was no exclusion of that. They just had to meet the income thresholds so that we could evidence back to HUD that it was a low, moderate income job that was being retained.
All right, no problem.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. I do not see any additional hands raised in the queue. If there are no further questions, Tim, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Solicitor, thank you for sticking around. You guys have a wonderful afternoon, and councilors, thank you for bearing with us for the last hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. Maybe it's just an hour and a half. You guys have a great afternoon, and I will see you on Tuesday.